I think it's time that the world powers got serious about who they're facing, and Iran is one of those key players, because the war that's been going on between Israel and the Hamas in Gaza is not really all that's been going on in that area. Israel's been fighting on 7 fronts, and behind those 7 fronts is Iran. Iran is really the focus of the world's attention, or at least it should be.
Welcome to Stakelbeck Tonight. I'm Erick Stakelbeck, and the world's oldest and most powerful military alliance is meeting all this week in Washington, D.C. The annual NATO summit will see leaders from the 32 NATO member nations gather to discuss the gathering storm at our doorsteps and how to defend the West against growing tyranny and terror. Hey, that's why NATO was founded in 1949 in the wake of World War II and as the Soviet Union was on the rise. The alliance worked very well during the Cold War, and now NATO has a chance once again to step up and to live up to its original mission. Because, folks, we are living right now in the most dangerous moment for the world since the days of Hitler and Stalin. Evil is on the march once again, personified by what I call the Gathering Storm Coalition. It's led by the senior partners, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. They're all working very closely together militarily and economically. Then there are the junior partners, Cuba, Venezuela, Belarus, and the Assad regime in Syria, along with Iran-backed terror groups like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Hamas. All of them are working with at least some of the senior partners to varying degrees because they all despise the West and Israel. Lastly, we have a NATO member nation, Turkey. It has 1 foot in NATO and 1 foot in the Gathering Storm Coalition. Under the iron-fisted rule of its radical Islamist president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey has become something more like NATO in name only. Erdogan has grown increasingly hostile to his NATO partners and is one of the world's most prominent Israel haters. So it will be very interesting to see how he maneuvers at the NATO summit in D.C. this week. Folks, this is the state of play in the world right now, and it ain't pretty. Rogue regimes abound. They've got a bullseye on the back of the United States, Western Europe, and Israel. They're working together, and there are serious doubts as to whether NATO is up to the task of defending Western civilization against this gathering storm. Just look at the United States, Great Britain, and France, which, along with Germany, are the 4 strongest NATO member nations. Let's start with France, where a motley mix of communists, socialists, and radical environmentalists called the New Popular Front just won parliamentary elections and may end up governing. Over in Britain, the left-wing Labour Party is now in charge after last week's election, which means more mass Islamic immigration, which means you can expect more scenes like this from Brighton, an English seaside resort town which just elected its first Muslim mayor. Folks, again, that's the mayor of a town in Great Britain, not Afghanistan. And then there is the United States, where it's become pretty clear to most people, even to his fellow Democrats, that Joe Biden is not physically or mentally up to the task of leading the free world. The recent presidential debate exposed this for all the world to see, including our enemies abroad. This is a dangerous situation. Now, it's still unclear whether Biden will be the Democrats' nominee come November, regardless of his vows to stay in the race. But you can bet that the Gathering Storm Coalition is watching all of the chaos unfolding here and in Europe with the rise of the radical left, and they sense opportunity. Weak men create hard times. And when the animating, unifying symbol among younger generations here in the West seems to be the Palestinian flag, you know you've got problems. We'll see what the NATO summit brings this week, but folks, at the root, the problems we face here in America and across the Western world are spiritual in nature. It truly is revival or bust, a collective turning back to God. A modern-day great awakening is ultimately the only answer. And the hour is late, but not too late. The West is in very bad shape, no doubt. But tonight we'll break down some ways that we can get back on track. And it all starts now. Well, that gathering storm coalition that I just described has been very busy as of late. That includes Iran, which just confirmed that it's expanding its ballistic missile production. Now, Iran already has the largest ballistic missile stockpile in the entire Middle East, but it needs to up its game even more in order to help supply its allies, Russia and Hezbollah. Joining me now from London to break down all of the latest news from the Middle East and Europe and why it matters to you is journalist and geopolitical commentator Jonathan Sacerdoti. What do you make of the likes of Iran and Russia teaming up? As NATO meets in D.C. this week, it seems like this is a topic that should be at the top of their agenda.
Eric, it's good to be with you. And I think you're right that we need to start looking at the world in a more joined up way. And while there's been an awful lot of attention given to the war in Israel, for example, even to Ukraine, though that interest has waned in recent months and years, I think it's important that we start to look at the alliances behind what's going on. And we accept that this is really not localized anymore. It's a world war. With NATO meeting for that 75th anniversary summit, it will be looking back and celebrating history, but it also needs to be looking forwards and making history. I think it's time that the world powers got serious about who they're facing, and Iran is one of those key players because the war that's been going on between Israel and the Hamas in Gaza is not really all that's been going on in that area. Israel's been fighting on 7 fronts, and behind those 7 fronts is Iran. Iran is really the focus of the world's attention, or at least it should be. Iran is the one that's controlling those proxies, including Hamas and Hezbollah. Iran is also backing the Houthis in Yemen. Iran is behind all of the unrest in that region and beyond, because it threatens the whole world in terms of terrorism and attacks that could take place much closer to home for folks in the US and also here in the UK. So I do think it's important that as the NATO leaders meet, they take a broader view of what's going on in the world and look at those alliances and also strengthen our alliances, because that's really what's going to see down Iran in this fight.
Jonathan, great points all around. And as you said, look, Iran is the head of the snake in the Middle East and beyond, certainly when it comes to attacking Israel and planning for Israel's demise. But you mentioned it, Jonathan, this is a global threat. Could you break that down a bit more? How the Iranian regime not only is a threat to Israel and nations like Saudi Arabia, but it's a global threat that includes right here in the West. And I'm thinking in particular about Iran's nuclear program.
Indeed, Iran has said that it wasn't trying to get nuclear weapons, but I don't think anyone believes that anymore. And indeed, with the JCPOA, the so-called Iran deal in the Obama era, I think we saw Iran make a very clever deal. It really didn't stop them going for nuclear weapons capability. It just delayed it a bit. And of course, Trump withdrew from that, and what's happened since is what's happened since. But Iran that behaves this way now through its proxies will behave, well, much worse should it manage to get nuclear weapons, because that will give it a level of impunity. It will mean that it can continue to threaten Israel and the West and the wider world. And I think it's important to remember why it makes those threats. The Iranian dictatorship, the theocratic regime there, operates rationally, one could say, but in service of a completely irrational end, an irrational goal. They are a theocratic regime, that is, that they are focused on a religious vision, which sees them believing in the hidden imam who will reappear at the end of days. There'll be a catastrophic event, much of which we might be seeing at the moment, and this could, of course, be spurring them on to do more. So should they have nuclear weapons capability, should they have the ability to carry out non-nuclear attacks, but with the threat of nuclear attacks, that means it will be much harder to defeat Iran and its axis of evil and terror around the globe. That's why it's so important that Iran's nuclear weapons acquisition should become an increased focus. People should be working much harder across the globe and in the West to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, Jonathan, you made a key point. Look, this is a regime that holds an apocalyptic ideology and worldview. So rest assured, if they get the bomb, there's a very good chance they will use it. Hey, about a minute left. Iran held an election over the weekend, if you can call it that, and we have Masoud Pezeshkian, the new Iranian president. Is this a case of meet the new boss, same as the old boss? Will we see any difference in Iran's posture with this new president?
Unfortunately, I think it is a question of the same old, same old. This recent election isn't really an election as you or I would know it. And I think that Pezeshkian, who was called in the Western media a moderate, the more moderate possible reformer, that's all a bit of an illusion, and that's a clever trick that Iran plays. Of course, he won't make the decisions. The so-called supreme leader, Khamenei, will make them. The IRGC will make them. He's there as window dressing. No, the West should be supporting any kind of uprising within Iran that will overthrow the regime, the Islamic Republic. That should be the keen focus that we all have. We shouldn't be fooled by so-called moderates taking the position as president. They wouldn't even be allowed to run if they weren't under the control of the supreme leader.
We're talking about getting the West back on track. And folks, great timing to talk about this as we have, again, NATO member nations meeting in Washington, D.C. for their annual summit. Look, the ultimate solution for the West is revival. It's revival or bust, as I have said here on the show many, many times. But in the meantime, in the natural, when it comes to foreign policy, a policy of peace through strength, I believe, is the way forward in countering that gathering storm coalition. So here's a quick case study from the Trump administration regarding one of the charter members of that gathering storm, the Iranian regime. Now, whether you like President Trump or you don't like President Trump, it's pretty clear to me that his foreign policy was highly effective, in particular in dealing with the Iranian regime. Here are 7 quick points, 7 quick examples of peace through strength. Number 1, President Trump pulled the United States out of that disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Now, the Obama administration signed that deal into law in 2015, and folks, what it did was reward the Iranian regime, the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, with billions of dollars in sanctions relief. And predictably, it only emboldened Iran to continue to pursue a nuclear program covertly, but to up its sponsorship of terror around the region. And we saw the bitter fruits of that on October 7th, and with a succession of Iranian-backed terror attacks in the region and beyond. So the Trump administration made the Iranian regime face some consequences. Hey, the spigot was turned off. The Iran nuclear deal was done, at least for a while. Now the Biden administration seems hell-bent on reviving that deal. Number 2, another example of peace through strength, President Trump ordered the elimination of Iranian terror master Qasem Soleimani. Now, folks, he was a leader of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force, an arch-terrorist who was arguably the world's most dangerous, influential, and powerful terrorist. That was all done in early January 2020 when President Trump ordered a drone strike that eliminated Qasem Soleimani, sent a message, a very clear message to the Iranian regime, needless to say, and to terrorists around the world. By the way, President Trump also eliminated Omar al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, during his term. Again, peace through strength. Speaking of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps that Soleimani headed up, President Trump designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Once again, a clear message going on the offensive in the diplomatic realm against the Iranian regime. Another example of going on the offensive diplomatically, the Trump administration, 2018, moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the city as Israel's one and only ancestral capital. And again, That sent a message to Iran, to the world, to the shared enemies of America and Israel that a new sheriff was in town. Number 5, President Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the crucial Golan Heights region where Iran would love to set up shop. Number 6, of course, as we've covered here extensively on TBN, President Trump helped to establish the Abraham Accords peace treaties between Israel and its Sunni Arab neighbors, made history there, and again, weakened Iran in the process. Lastly, he cut off funding to the Palestinian Authority and the UN Works and Relief Agency, also known as UNRWA, 2 terror hotbeds, not linked to the Iranian regime, but nevertheless, a shot across the bow to terrorists around the world. And that, folks, that's 7 examples of peace through strength. It's tried, it's true, it works, and we need to get back to it sooner rather than later as that gathering storm continues to converge on our nation and across the West.
Stakelbeck Tonight, my all-new nightly series on current events through a bold biblical lens. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching, and God bless.